Welcome to part two of Psychoanalysis Nostalgia, Hope in Longing. So far we have seen the different flavors. We have also explored how psychoanalytically we see nostalgia. And somewhere in the therapy, also, we feel that there is parts of nostalgia being lived and reintegrated, and it has some healing potential.
Right.
So, how nostalgia have a healing potential?
Uh, in fact, the central movement of psychoanalysis is to go back, analyze, relive more, undergo catharsis, and be free from the strange hold of the past. That's almost a central movement of psychoanalysis. In the sense, uh, it is a very historically healing approach. It's not a future oriented approach. Like, we don't talk so much that if you give yourself a positive goal, what all can psychoanalytically happen. So it is not so much pulled from the future, rather the purification of the past, the central thrust of psychoanalysis. Now, this is also in the same line. We are talking of nostalgia, which is of the past, and it is seen at present in a special way, that we are not only recollecting the past, we are uh, enriching that recollection with lot of selection and affect. We pick and choose certain parts of the past, not the whole of the past. So it's a very connoisseur selection of the raw materials from which we will develop this nostalgia. And also we wrap that thing up in many feelings which actually would not have been there when we actually experienced it. So nostalgia is not only reliving, it is recreating and reliving. In the sense, we are not reliving something as it occurred when it occurred. We are enriching that with many thoughts, feelings. We become an editor of that memory.
Mm.
We put that memory in Photoshop and then we create nostalgia out of it.
And sometimes we start beautifying simple joys which we lived.
Correct. So what happens is ki, it is a special kind of going back. And this special kind of going back is a deeply moving going back. Because somewhere it enriches the truth which we find emotionally to be a half truth. And we complete that emotional truth, leaving the factuality as it is or editing it as necessary. And it has very good healing potential. It's very good for psychic health. It's not actually an option, it's a necessity.
Mm.
Therefore, if one does not accept this natural law, then the midlife crisis or the dreams which happen during that midlife crisis or in the old age, they force you to go back. So man has to go back. You have to go back, spend time and reintegrate the past, go into nostalgia. So nostalgia is one component of the entire movement of reintegrating the past. But it's one of the most juicy and moving components. And it's also a special entity because there can be some complexes which involve more affect than nostalgia but are completely repressed and inaccessible. But here we have something from the past which is accessible and yet deeply moving. So uh, I always say man has to go back. Without that, there is no going forward in the sense of being wholesome, happy, and integrated in the wider, healthier sense of the term. So we reintegrate, we go back in nostalgia for reintegration, reliving, and re enriching ourselves. And we also
So
created in
what
nostalgia a safe station. You're saying
If
something?
you have to, yeah, I was saying, I was somewhere nostalgic about certain things myself while you were sharing. If we have to give an archetype to this version of ours, is it a storyteller?
Yeah, it's a storyteller. The only special thing about it is here we are telling a story to ourselves.
Yes.
It's a very special kind of storytelling where the storyteller and the story listener is the same. And yet, this storytelling is very important. There is no substitute to this storytelling. And if we don't do it consciously or unconscious does it to whatever extent it can. So nostalgia is a very special kind of storytelling to
So
oneself,
what part
of
of,
oneself.
okay, so but what part of mind is it similar to, um, uh, personally speaking, I have also experienced nostalgia sometimes as it is on demand. It is sometimes bit of more extra flavor of fantasy added to that pleasure of it, along with a more experiential version of that story which you have lived. So what exactly is it? Something similar to what the in the dream process kind of a thing? Is it like a lucid part of that ours
Yeah,
which does this?
yeah, correct. So mm, what happens is it's the nostalgia creation process is a dream-like creation process, but
Mm.
we don't find that kind of a uh, disguise and hiding and coding as we find in dreams. The fact of the point of fantasy which we find here is enrichment of past with many relishable emotions, making the past far more beautiful than it actually was when it occurred. So it is a dreamlike process which in a way changes reality into something more that satisfies our wish. It's a wish fulfillment process is there. But apart from that, the other defenses in the dream work that we see that we don't see here. We don't see condensation, we don't see substitution because the cognitive memory is intact and accurate and very precise. But the affective part is
No,
where the enrichment comes. The poetry plays its part.
yeah, no wonder man created cameras to capture those memories so they go revisit and feel nostalgic about it.
Correct. The entire recording industry goes on to this. Whether you record on video or you record on audio, but you always go back. And you also have every few years some company coming up with a range of retro products. In movies, you can have
True.
relaunch of retro movies. Recently, there was a relaunch in Bombay of some old Devanand movie. And
Mm-hmm.
not only those who were senior came, but even the young ones came and everyone was humming the songs when the songs were on in the movie.
Yeah, in case of periodic and historic movies too.
Yeah. So that
One
relaunch,
is unlived.
please go on. What is
I was
unlived?
just coming to a point. What is one's, there is a nostalgia of one's own life and events around it. There is a nostalgia of collective events like history. So that too, it teleports us when we have such movies and stories around us, the mythological versions of those episodes. We have a collective nostalgia to those eras. So this shows how basic, hardwired nostalgia is in us in form of life force and creativity.
Correct. And
Does that provides
how deeply the need is.
the need is, and does that provide a point of catharsis somewhere?
It
Because
does. It does.
we go through a lot
Yeah.
in nostalgia.
Yeah. So what happens here is कि uh, nostalgia provides us a very specific station to go back to, and it can be a very good entry point in psychotherapy, particularly psychoanalytic psychotherapy, to open up and enter the interior parts of the mind. So it can be a point from where the cognitive analysis can go on, a point from where a movement into feelings and catharsis can go on, a point from where the creative faculty can create its own fantasies and constructive visions of the idea of good life, which often is hidden. And we come to know what the idea of good life is, because one does not create fantasies of nostalgia the same way. Different people create it differently. So, what point in your past you anchor your nostalgia to? What are the elements there? Do you go to the same memory or different memories? And what are each of the elements in that nostalgic picture? And what feelings are there for each of them? So, that's almost like a dream analysis, except that
True.
it's easy to decode. The dream work has not taken place to that extent. But that creative fantasy
In
process is
fact,
still there, enriching the past as it presents itself to you as you go in search of it.
when I was asking about this catharsis, I'm reminded of one of the sessions with a client where um, he was going in the withdrawal of heroin substance abuse. And he was silent throughout. And the only place where I could break the ice was taking him to nostalgia of good old times, where he had some memories. But the effect generated was from it is a very much a strong junction where you can flip the story of present. So
Right.
it is very cathartic. I just am reminded of that.
And often it can provide or make vivid the obvious. It can provide meaning to somebody who has meaning in his life but is not able to find it.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's lost hopes.
yeah, it is like you did something good, but you never appreciated, nor anybody else appreciated. And in that nostalgic going back, you come to realize that you indeed did something good and it's worth feeling proud of. So the uncharitable world that was with you,
Mm.
it is undone, and for the first time, you see the truth of the goodness in you. And this is also a very good geriatric medicine.
Yeah.
That uh, if you go to senior people, talk to them about their past and see how animated they are. So you take their picture before you start the talk, take the picture after you take the talk, and take the picture after the talk. And after the talk, you can see a deep sense of satisfaction on their face.
Gleamy eyes on. Yes, yes.
One of the best medicines in old age is nostalgia. So, to the therapist, it provides a lot of things. It's a point of entry, it's a point of catharsis, which can lead to a point of catharsis. It's an exploration, it's an entry into the deepest desires, it's an entry into how one processes something across one's life. For example, if the nostalgia goes back to those losses that you had rather than the victories you had, then obviously loss is something very central to that psyche. And if somebody always goes back to the victories one had, it's a very different kind of a psyche. So
And
the
from there,
flavor,
we can instill the thoughts of learning from the losses as well, so that the nostalgia becomes an a self-accomplishing. While I say that, I have this another question. If I hope it doesn't take us to part three, if I add on to this question, if we see in the therapeutic setup, therapist is reparenting, rather a person is reparenting themselves. Is nostalgia a byproduct of unacknowledged psyche of one's life or otherwise?
uh, parts of what comes up once one enters into nostalgia, because nostalgia, as I said, is many things. Right? It can be a point of entry into the inner world which we have never explored before. It can lead us to feelings and therefore catharsis. It can be a very deep beginning of a psychoanalytic, existential, and spiritual exploration, which may take oneself and one's life in a completely different direction. And uh, Therefore, uh, can you repeat the question?
My question was that if there is a lack of self reflection in parenting, where they're not being, not self reflection, reflecting on child's accomplishments and life, will it lead to poor nostalgia or a better nostalgia?
Yeah, so this will be different for different people. That where does nostalgia take you to?
No, that is there. But how parent does that parent train a child to learn to live in nostalgia? Because I've seen many families where this nostalgia concept is very poorly developed, rather, I would
Correct,
say this.
correct,
So,
correct,
is it in the upbringing where parents are doing it for themselves and the child learns to do so? Is it a mirroring act which a child learns from a parent, or it is because eventually in the therapy we have to teach them how to get nostalgic about
correct.
things?
So you will
So,
have three kinds of families. Those who admire going into nostalgia and do it with a relish and respect.
yes,
Those
yes.
who occasionally do
There's a
it,
culture in those families to do
and
so, rituals.
yeah, and there are second group where it's normal. They don't look very highly upon it, but it's normal. And the third is where it's condemned. And when people come from those families where nostalgia and going into nostalgia is condemned as something useless, then we will have to actually support them to really enable them to go into nostalgia and leverage all the goodness of nostalgia. But in many families, it's very normal, at least in India, at least till now, it is normal for uh, elderly people to meet once in a while and talk about those good old times. And
And
nobody
if I
pounces
just sit
upon
in
them.
the corner, yeah, sit in the corner and look at the old black and white albums of their life and share stories from there. Yeah.
So, in fact, we can have those nostalgia spas where people experience that nostalgia in a different way.
True.
Unfortunately, the whole idea of nostalgia and the storytelling and mythology is slowly reducing. So that's a difficult part. That's getting less and less of social acceptance and social admiration.
So let's go more deeper, sir. Please put some light. How does this actually work?
Works in a variety of ways, but in a very deep way.
Mm.
Because we live in times where general analysis of anything, and this informs psychoanalytic process also, is largely utilitarian and capitalist in its nature. And from that point of view, nostalgia would appear as a waste of time and energy, and therefore it would get condemned. And one would look at it as regression, as inability to deal with reality, problem of reality, acceptance, reality, adjustment, and so on. But uh, that analysis is very partial analysis. It is peculiar to the times that we live, especially after the Industrial Revolution and
Mm.
especially after 1980s. It's a very peculiar time in which we live, where the condemnation of nostalgia, of anything slow, of going into nature, of being with mythology and tradition, of going into village and being with people and not doing anything else, this is seen as a waste of time. Because it's a very economically driven model. What does not create economic value is a waste of time. So the word value has been hijacked by economics. We no longer put value to spiritual value, to well being, to the necessities of the psyche, to the mythology, and so on. So, one aspect is that this works at levels which are very deep. So, the conscious mind may think it is a waste of time because it's not utilitarian and not value generating in the capitalist sense of the term. But from a deeper level, it is very healing, very wholesome, and it is like a kind of um, a pain reliever for the difficult life one has been through, if that has been the case. It is like regaining those lost objects if one has lost too many. Because you make alive in nostalgia those objects that have been lost and you have an interaction with those objects. So there is a galaxy of lost objects and interaction with them in a complete denial of reality, which is very healing. So in nostalgia, we often meet, you want to meet, but you cannot meet. And you enrich that thing. It's like you create a movie out of your own past and you feel good because it's your own past. It's not a borrowed past of
Mhm.
anybody else. And that sets a different quality to that enrichment because it's our own most in a sense. To use Heidegger's term, own most, our nostalgia is our own most in two ways. One, it is based upon our experiences and nobody else's. And two, it is our own in the deepest sense of the term, far deeper than where the conscious mind would go.
Where the conscious mind would go.
It's beyond the reach of the conscious mind. So, at levels which are deeper than the conscious mind, deep into the unconscious, there we feel it as our own most. Although the conscious mind would know that this is a part dream and not reality, but still we feel that our own most far more than logically what we find really ours in the real world.
Makes sense.
And that is something that tells us the depth of where the fantasy operates in the human mind and how the psychic needs deeply unmet can at times overshadow even the biological needs. You can see that in picture poor people going to movies compromising on their food. This is very common in southern Indian states where the movie going is almost like movie worship kind of social situation. So at very deep levels where the psyche is geared in evolution to be engaged with mythology, nature, uh, community, spirituality, at those deep levels and levels just above it, which deal with loss, which deal with the hardness of life, which deal with the lost world one wanted to conquer but one could not. Because it's like a pain reliever you spray on those open wounds, which are the open wounds of unfulfilled desires with which you started at 25. So we all start with a truckload of dreams and end with a basket of tragedies. So on that basket of tragedies, you spray this pain reliever of nostalgia. And the good part is it not only relieves pain but also gives you happiness. It's a strange kind of a hyper efficient pain reliever.
Also, it's very strikingly, I'm just being thoughtful about it, that how when we ask a 7-year old or a 10-year old or a 15-year old about the past, that doesn't have this nostalgic flavor to it.
Correct.
They remember it in a very fact driven mode. While you ask a 70-year old, it will have all the juiciness and all the surreal effect of that event. So probably midlife, as you said, it is somewhere in the strike of the mid noon where this nostalgia starts becoming juicy. The entire experience is a amalgamized with more of juiciness around it. In in an attempt to have juiciness in life, which is being stolen with the time period.
Correct. Because the young one still has hope in future. He has not been disappointed so hard that he has resigned. He has not failed so hard that he dare not retry. So he is yet to experience the hardness of life. The desert of life has not yet visited him. He still sees the green grass in the future. But the old man cannot. Uh, there is a couplet
Hmm.
says, uh, to hope for another morning. What new promise will you make to these tired eyes?
Yeah, beautiful.
To hope for another morning. What new promise will you make to these tired eyes? There are no new promises to be made. You have seen enough and you have grasped reality enough, and that's very depressing and pessimistic.
Yeah.
And so, for a large section of the population, life will be a very deep disappointment in many ways. So, for them, there is no way but to color and flavor the past. That's the only way they can maintain the juiciness in their life. So, the young one has hope in the future. The old one has hope only in an unfulfilled longing. And therefore, the unfulfilled longing, along with some color and flavor, goes into creation of nostalgia.
As we talk about nostalgia, I'm reminded of that old song of Jagjit Singh, "ये दौलत भी ले लो, ये शोहरत भी ले लो, भले मुझसे छीन लो मेरी जवानी."
Correct.
So art has a lot to do with nostalgia, and in fact art is revisiting in nostalgic form to those places, those wounds, those beloved ones, the lost ones, just not in the lingual form but many other forms. So does art speak of nostalgia itself?
Yeah, it speaks softly and loudly both. Art is full of nostalgia. एक हसीना थी एक दीवाना था क्या उम्र क्या समा क्या जमाना था. So it's all about nostalgia. And art celebrates without any inhibition what one feels like celebrating. It is psychoanalysis which is inhibited. So art celebrates without inhibition. And it celebrates nostalgia in very different flavors. Like the couplet I recited was celebrating in the romantic flavor, nostalgia. Now let me recite another flavor, another couplet. Uh, राही बिना जैसे सुनी गलियां.
Hmm.
Now it is like somebody has been sitting at the windows in his childhood and looks out in the sunny bright afternoons of India and sees nobody. But it was a strange feeling inside of looking out of the window. And as an adult, again that longing comes, unfulfillable longing and undescribable longing. When one sits at the window and looks out in bright sunny afternoon. And this typically is the 12 to 4 period.
Yes.
When one looks out of the window on a bright sunny afternoon
Yes.
in India, it creates a very different kind of a longing and you celebrate very different kind of nostalgia.
Oh, I live that almost every week. Some bougainvillea in the afternoon silently would remind me of something nostalgic.
So,
True.
poetry, novels, art, everyone is in nostalgia, including mythology. And there is a huge nostalgia of mythology, of how the ideal world
Is,
once was.
is it that of a collective nostalgia,
It's a collective nostalgia.
the mythology?
Nostalgia also suffuses ideology. And that's a very
Mm,
important point to note that even political ideologies of today are suffused with nostalgia in a very strange and difficult way.
nostalgia. True. These days, more tangentially.
Yeah, yeah. So there's something primal about nostalgia.
Mm. So, is nostalgia then not also related to the primal lost heaven?
Partly it is. There is a very interesting phrase, and therefore I call it the that particular type of nostalgia I call the great nostalgia. And
Mhm.
to borrow Freud's words, you can call it the universal neurosis of the species. And to use
Oh.
contemporary language, yeah, you can call it the sublime object of ideology. And to use my phrase, you can call it the dream I never had, the dream we never had. So what the
Mhm.
way it works is this: that uh, there is always an experience of the all good, omnipotent all good of the childhood. partly which is real and partly which is made up by our own imagination. But we all have in our minds a entity which tells us about the ecstatic all good experience, an ecstatic all good object. And that object then becomes the object of mythology, political ideology, spirituality, philosophy. And this sublime object is what we are all chasing through ideologies. And therefore, there is a very specific kind of nostalgia attached to ideology, and it's very necessary that a proper kind of nostalgia and a proper kind of sublime object is something that you are chasing, and a part of it you want to implement in your real life. So it's very necessary for societies to have good guiding nostalgia, to enable it with vision. Societies which don't have a good guiding nostalgia or a good guide on nostalgia, societies of that type perish.
As such, nuclear families are going to, remove this concept, because if you don't have grandparents who are nostalgic,
Right.
his child is not going to learn it.
So we have to bring back nostalgia into culture and uh, give it value it deserves and get it in our lives to enrich our lives and provide us with more health and wholesomeness and quality of life.
Sir, I would like you to throw some light on one of the psychoanalytic concept of sadism, not in the darker side. I've seen people having that sadistic nostalgia which gives them pleasure,
Hmm.
of that of a lost love, grieving over someone, but it brings them a joy.
Right. So it's a different
How would you?
kind, yeah, it's a different kind of a masochistic nostalgia where the melancholy is slightly more than the pleasure. But because of that masochism, that melancholy is also converted into pleasure in an unconscious way.
Yeah, sorry, not sadism. Yeah, which is
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a masochism which converts that
yeah,
melancholy into a sweet, bitter delight.
yeah.
So you can have that soft masochism, and this soft masochism can also be extremely creative.
Yes. Again, a lot of artwork takes place there.
And somebody can
The
even
lost
relish that,
dream, lost love.
yeah, and somebody can even relish that experience. See, one thing about nostalgia is it's by and large very safe,
You have the command in your hand.
and
How
there is
deep you
no
want.
other who can hurt, and it's not alive. Nothing is going to happen outside of your control. So, in a way, the past gets more sanitized the more time passes. The sharpness rounds as time passes. And another way to look at nostalgia is to, in some cases, extreme cases of very hard life and lot of darkness inside, is to look at it
Mm.
from point of courage, which we have not talked about. That nostalgia in those cases is a flame of light moving about in the dark spaces of the unconscious with courage and indifference to no matter
What it may bring up.
how big the universe of darkness may be. So
Yeah.
that's
And it
also
can
one,
bring up anything.
yeah, and that's the courage aspect of nostalgia in some cases. But as you said, uh, the you can have a
And sweet
flavor of
pleasure.
nostalgia used by masochism, soft masochism.
Very soft. Very refined, rather.
Yeah, it can also be used by another situation of narcissism, where when you cannot win straight, you become great by being the wounded hero.
How to miss that?
Yeah, so that wounded hero effect that can use nostalgia in a masochistic way to give that crick of greatness and narcissism.
Why has psychoanalysis been so hesitant in celebrating such phenomenal psychological concept, nostalgia.
Psychoanalysis is a very depressed profession. It's a depressed community, almost like of, for, and by the depressed. So it doesn't know to celebrate anything, in fact. If you look at the history of psychoanalysis, you will see that the journey of concepts in psychoanalysis is largely this. You discover some concept as a pathological concept. After some years, you say this is found in an attenuated form under control in normal individuals also. And after some years, you say in certain situations, this can also be used positively. So there's a healthy version of it. And this has been the journey of so many concepts in psychoanalysis. So the history of psychoanalysis tells us that it's very difficult for psychoanalysis to accept something as being capable of being pathological, normal, and constructive in different degrees in different situations. So that's the difficulty with nostalgia. Has been largely in stage one, where it is deemed only pathological. It's only recently that people have started looking at it as something normal, and very few have the courage to call it something which is enriching, constructive, and good. So I think in times to come, we will learn to celebrate the enriching parts of nostalgia. And we'll be able to say to ourselves that uh, the nostalgia is not only about attending to the wounds of the present, but also about creating a rich future. Psychoanalysis has largely been till now prose looking at pathological poetry of the past. We now need it to slightly widen to become healthy prose and healthy poetry, looking at the pathological poetry of the past and also looking at the rich poetry of the future. That is where the celebration component comes in, the creative open component comes in. And when that engages with nostalgia, nostalgia will be seen not only as a regression and as something pathological, but not only something as normal, but more than normal, as something which is deeply constructive and enriching.
Let's see what this discussion opens up for the nostalgic canvas for each one of us to paint it with a new creative force. It was yet another insightful exploration. After long, it was a deep intellectual travel. Hope our viewers